Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Changing Normal podcast. It's May 26th, 2022. And this is Owen and Dan and Ben joining you to talk to you this week about, well, I don't know what we're going to talk about all kinds of stuff. Crypto and experts and stuff in the news and all of that stuff like we usually do. So why don't we start this week with what we did this week. What did we do interesting? What did you guys do interesting?
Do you want to go first, Dan, or do you want me to?
Sure, I'll jump in. I actually didn't do a whole lot exciting, but just this is like spring busy season. So planting crops, been planting some potatoes, been caring for my berry bushes and hazelnuts, and those are pretty cool. Looks like I'll have a really good crop of haskaps this year.
Okay. Well, I've got a lot of blossoms on mine. The ones that I propagated have really taken off this year and quite large. But I wanted to ask you about that actually, because I've got, do you know anything about pruning them?
You shouldn't have to prune them. I mean, maybe when they get older, but I mean, mine are still only like 5 years old.
Well, I got 2 bushes from a greenhouse anyway. Down south in the southern part of New Brunswick. Yeah, we say down south in New Brunswick. We really only mean about 3 hours away. But they were quite old, I know, when I got them. And I put them in my swales and my food forest. And they, established themselves. They are now absolutely huge. Like, these are the biggest haskap bushes I've ever seen in my life. They probably... I don't even know what to compare it to. They must be like 3 feet across or 2 feet across anyway. And rounded, like almost like you shaped them, like trimmed them with a hedge trimmer. They're beautiful plants. But I've never picked a single berry off them. There hardly is even a blossom.
Really?
On those plants.
Blossoms. That's interesting.
The only thing I can figure is that they need some pruning, or there's something maybe I need to amend the soil with to get them doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, it could be some pruning would bring them around a little bit. You see that sometimes with plants that simply put on wood.
Yeah.
No, I haven't had any trouble getting blossoms. And I
Okay.
would have been less surprised if you'd said they'd had blossoms, but then produced really poor berries. It's like, okay, so we got some nutritional problems there. But yeah, I would give some pruning a shot.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, I know how to kind of approach an apple tree somewhat, but I don't, a little bush like that. I'm like, I don't know. Do I just go in and start? Because there's nothing dead per se, but maybe they need some light, because I know with apple trees, you want to get light to the center of your tree, so that you get light on your branches, on the buds, and all of that. But with these bushes, if you pull back the foliage and look inside, there's nothing inside. Like, everything's dead inside. Well, I say dead, like there's no leaves, or it's just the woody part of the bush. But then the whole outside is where all the leaves are.
Yep.
So there's no like dead wood to cut out. So I don't know if I just need to go in and just be like, all right, I'll just gotta hack out a few things to get some light in.
Yeah.
But
I mean, pruning out the center might be a good place to start. It definitely isn't as easy to tell on a small bush. I mean, with an apple tree, it's pretty clear. Like, the vertical growth is vegetative growth. You're not going to get fruit off it. So you knock that off, open up more space. It is more straightforward. Yeah, I don't know, because these are such a new crop still. There's not like a track record of different.
No, there's not much information out there on
them. So
that's right. Yeah. And I got more plants questions for you. Maybe we'll talk afterwards, because I want a different episode. I want to question you on hazelnuts. So anyway, I was really looking forward to your segment, because you were like, in your show notes, you apparently you did really cool stuff that you can't talk about, and I was hoping we were going to talk about it, but
yeah, I know. I want to set really high expectations and then disappoint. It's reverse psychology.
Oh, that's funny. All right. What about you, Ben?
I don't have any experience with berries, but my coffee plants are doing pretty well. I had to prune some dead leaves off of those suckers.
Okay.
My week was relatively chill, nothing too crazy going on. The Thor chain group, so the people behind Thor Wallet and Thor Swap and ThorSwap.finance and stuff like that, they released an app. So I've been playing around with that. It's like if Bitcoin is one rabbit hole, the whole decentralized exchange land of the Thor area and the Rune token and stuff like that is just crazy. So that, and I finally got my my float Plank owner NFTs into my OpenSea wallet. So
okay,
nothing too crazy.
That was all Greek. That was all Greek to me, but
let's see. I haven't gone too far down the Thor chain rabbit hole, but essentially it just allows for like liquidity. There's a bunch of different things like you can do yield farming and earn on different assets, but the main focus of the project and what they seek to do is decentralize in a decentralized way. They want to allow you to just completely cross-chain swap. So like Bitcoin into Ethereum without having to wrap the Bitcoin in an ERC20 token or whatever. That's the basics of it. It's been a while since I listened to the head developer talk about it, but that was kind of the essence of it. So
interesting.
Then the float stuff. Float is free speech centered social media. They're just kind of getting off the ground. They just released their version 1.0. They call it Catamaran because they're very boat and ship oriented.
Yeah, not everything they do kind of has nautical themes, eh?
Yeah. But a very, very cool platform. The people are very chill. It's a very grassroots project. It's literally a bunch of decentralized people working on one project. But the Plank owner NFTs, basically it was like something to do with the people that were on the program when it was like in beta, and then moving into version 1.0 and the main net and stuff. It just allows for like a tiered perk sort of deal. So they're coming out with their own token, the float token, which is very structured after Bitcoin itself. Like they're going to have 21 million units, and they're going to be divisible down to 100 million. And but they want them to be utilized within the float ecosystem. Like they kind of market float as a Facebook, Twitter, YouTube killer, basically. Like they don't want to be able
except they don't have an app, and I can't get it to work for me.
Yeah, they have actually so the Play Store and the App Store booted them off their beta APK, and then Google what happened. So basically the package, the file package that an app is coded into is called an APK, and they changed that. Google changed that, and Float basically said, okay, well, we're going to go with a progressive web application, which is basically just if you go to the site on your mobile browser phone or your phone browser, and then you can add it to your home screen, and that allows for you to interact with it through the browser, but in a very app-like sort of experience is what they say.
Kind of takes you straight there instead of having to, open it up and type in an address and then,
yeah, exactly. So their token is, and it was a really interesting interview with the CEO and COO and the people in charge of their crypto stuff, because they get that like Bitcoin is is the boss, and they don't want to, like, most people don't really want to sell Bitcoin at this point. Maybe if there's a wider adoption, it might change, but that's why they're doing their own tokens, so that within like the marketplace that they want, the groups, just different things within the whole float platform, they want to be able to utilize a token that people are okay with using within that space, and then you'll be able to they're using wrapped Bitcoin as well. So it's that's another rabbit hole that I went down and kind of climbed back out of. So.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Well, yeah, that's a good introduction to what float is all about. I didn't do a ton this week. I have very sexy audio, as hopefully people can tell. Much better than my previous first couple shows. So yeah, shout out to Ben at the Homegrown Podcast, who helps me adjust my settings and get my audio dialed in, because it's interesting. The more control you have, the more potential there is for problems and messing up. So I had all these settings. I had to, and I didn't know what to do with it all. So anyway, I'm glad it sounds much better now.
With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly. I got into a bunch of Bitcoin debates this week. One, still kind of working with some people, helping them set up some stuff, some of the same people as in the past, but an interesting discussion today, actually, with someone who's not sold on Bitcoin. He's interested, does a lot of research, smart guy, and is really questioning it and looking for the reasons it won't work, and trying to come up with, bring all the counter arguments and all of that sort of stuff that he hears. And so I had a long debate with him, which started as a Bitcoin debate, and his claim that Bitcoin is dead money, same as gold. And so I had to try to break down the difference between currency and money, and why we don't need Bitcoin at this point to work for us in the same way that we need currency to be invested to get a return, to beat inflation. That's why people invest Canadian dollars, because they need it to gain some kind of return, so that they're not losing money simply by holding it. Whereas Bitcoin, because of its the ability of it to hold value very well over time and actually increase in value over time, we don't necessarily have the same incentive to try to invest it for a return, if that makes sense. It's almost built in right now, at least, though I think we'll probably see something like that in the future. In a lot of ways, we don't need to try to beat inflation of Bitcoin, because Bitcoin doesn't inflate. Right. So anyway, we had that whole debate, and that went down some rabbit trails. And next thing you know, we were talking about, individual responsibility versus collective benefit. And do I need a license? Should I need a license to operate a vehicle? And all kinds of fun rabbit trails. Where does the governmental responsibility over people, how does that intersect with individual responsibility to, deal with the consequences of their actions? So anyway, quite fascinating. Made me late for my oil change on my truck, but was worth it. All right, let's do some crypto talk now that we've stretched this part out way longer than it probably needed to be. All right.
So here's the challenge we lined up for us this week. Can we explain the basic Bitcoin functions in 10 minutes? What is a blockchain anyway?
Okay, boys.
Okay, so I mean, I don't know how much you've researched this. I literally like this part of the coding cryptography part of Bitcoin is probably one of my weakest points of knowledge. But so far, one of the best explanations I've heard of it is actually in a book I'm reading right now. I'm leaving in my truck and I'm reading it during break times, coffee breaks, and lunch times at work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Book of Satoshi. I should have brought it in so I could have shown it to you. And it's basically almost a complete work of the posts that Satoshi made online prior to 2010 or whenever he went offline. And it gives a little kind of summarization, and then it gives an explanation. It gives the other person's post and then his reply to that post explaining how they're right, wrong, or whatever. Anyway, there's some really good explanations of this exact thing in there, which helped me understand it a little bit better. So anyway, I just want to recommend that book. It's an older book. I think it was published in 2014. So obviously we've come a long way since then. Some of the stuff he talks about it in the beginning is a little bit outdated, but still an interesting read so far.
Yeah,
anyway,
that sounds really neat.
That was not necessary for this. So
there went two of our.
We didn't even get the first. We didn't even get the first. We didn't even get the first point out, and I already took us down a squirrel trail. I'll be quiet now.
Blockchain's a ledger.
Yeah, blockchain is a ledger. Yeah.
Say something intelligent, you guys.
Go for it, Ben.
It's like you're making pancakes on Sunday morning, and the first pancake includes a whole bunch of data and transactions, and you know that pancake was made at whatever it is, 10:23. That goes on the plate.
I don't usually put receipts in my pancake batter.
But then you take the stack of pancakes that you made and flip it on its side, and that becomes a block. And each pancake is a block, and it contains the data of the transactions made within, I guess, Bitcoin is right around a 10-minute time frame, and then boop, 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 boop. It's all stacked up together.
Wow. Now I'm hungry.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I haven't heard it described like that. I think the description I liked was people call it a ledger of account, and think back to like old times when you would have had like a general store in every community, and the general store owner would have had a book, a ledger of accounts for everybody who bought and sold things there, and he would have kept a record of the credit and debits. And so that's basically your running tally. That's a ledger. Now, blockchain is a purely digital ledger, and as Ben pointed out, the timestamps are kind of what makes it unique. Every set of data that is added has the timestamp, and what has been added can't go back and be edited in any way. You can only add another block to the chain.
Yeah, and the whole thing works with cryptography. And this is the part I always kind of get messed up in my head. How
because
that
the data is hashed, right? Like that's
right.
There's the hash, and then there's the mining and the nodes that run a copy of the ledger. Because the hash is what in I don't know if encrypt is the correct term, but it like encodes the data to fit into the blockchain. Then the miners are the ones that are working to solve the process and confirm that block. And then once that block is confirmed, it gets added onto the blockchain and the ledger. And then each individual node, which is recording a copy of said blockchain, talks to each other, distributed and decentralized all throughout the world. And then that is what is decided on as the consensus, I think is the word I'm looking for. The consensus on what the most up to date.
Yep.
Yeah. It's based on whatever the longest chain is. And that was one of the things I learned in this book, was that the longest chain is always the one that is the true chain, essentially. And so there was all these like sort of what's the word I'm looking for? All these arguments saying, well, what about, if this happens? What if two transactions are at exactly the same second and only some of the, different nodes get different versions at the same, and they had all this kind of hypothetical what ifs laid out. And as I understand it, when that happens, if there's transactions almost get put on a side chain and then get included in another transaction further down, is almost how I saw it explained. Like it gets added into the next block or another block further down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that sounds correct. Definitely, there's more complicated stuff here, but I mean, basically,
I'm not a programmer either.
Measures, like Ben mentioned, distributed ledger. So there are copies everywhere around the world, and anybody who wants one can have that copy. But then there's also the cryptography level that keeps something secure, like your account, your private key. And then there's the computing power of the network is another level of security. So it's definitely quite secure, even though people think of digital things as totally unsecure. There are technologies that can make it totally secure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if someone tries to add an erroneous transaction or an addition to the blockchain, it then gets discarded by the rest of the nodes that are saying, no, this is actually the correct one. You're the minority of this transaction record. So then that gets discarded. I think, if I remember it correctly.
Yep. No, that's correct.
Yep. And so besides these levels of security, Bitcoin was also engineered in a very fair way, centered around the proof of work and then the Bitcoin release schedule, of course. So there was no pre-mining, no pre-distribution, basically, of Bitcoin. Everyone had to work to get the Bitcoin, or else they had to buy it on the open market. So I think that's an important point. This isn't just some initial public offering thing that was cooked up to, get somebody a pile of cash.
Yeah.
That's kind of what secures the network, right? The proof of work.
Yeah, proof of work is part of it. And it's also a measure of ensuring the fairness of the money, that it's a just money, that nobody has the ability to pull the strings, or nobody started out with $1 million and everybody else was at zero. So basically making it just from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. Which I think, and I think that's part of why why that initial mining by Satoshi, because let's be honest, he was the first miner. In that sense, receiving block rewards. So I think that's why it's important that wallet is sitting there with, I think isn't it like 1 million Bitcoin in it?
I'd have to check, but it is a lot. You're definitely,
it's a lot.
Correct about that.
Yeah, and it's sitting there, and it's kind of the known wallet that started it and is associated with him, and nothing's ever moved, and I suspect nothing ever will, because whoever Satoshi is, that I suspect the creator of something tends to be the most idealistic, or have the greatest ideals surrounding that, and the ability to stick to those ideals. And because we see the pattern of the ideals that Satoshi put into Bitcoin and what he was trying to do, he, she, they was trying to do, I suspect that the access to that wallet has been destroyed or burned, or in some way that Satoshi isn't sitting there with his, keys to his wallet going, someday, I don't think that whoever Satoshi is has to be dead for there not to be any access to that. I think that ideologically that person could have said, this is catching on. There's other nodes, there's other miners. It's, this thing is happening. All of that Bitcoin that I accumulated at the beginning, because I was the first, I'm going to basically lock it out of the system so that I do not create any advantage or be tempted to use it. I think that's an interesting concept. I don't know that that's true. That's somewhat speculation on my part, but wouldn't surprise me.
History in the making in many ways. It's so fascinating to me. Kind of makes me wish I was in on the early days. But having that record, that book sounds fascinating that you mentioned earlier, and then just trying to understand the mindset of the creators of it and understanding their work. Pretty cool stuff.
Yep. So did you want to talk about transactions and wallets and
do we want to get
custodial,
into
or
that
do we
in
want
the next episode?
Yeah, we're gone a little bit long probably on this.
Definitely jump into the wallet side of things next week. That would be a fun one.
Yeah, that might make a good topic all by itself, wouldn't it?
Yeah, for maybe.
Apps. Lots of
yeah. Okay. Well.
And now for something completely different.
So.
Totally different.
You guys are experts.
Absolutely.
Self-proclaimed, yes.
Yes. Hey, it's still an expert, according to today's way of thinking. So, we thought we'd talk a little bit today about the idea of being an expert. What is an actual expert or expertise? Should we be listening to experts? Can there be self-proclaimed experts? We all know what an expert is, right?
Do we?
Someone with
That's
expertise
hard to
on
say.
Well, how's that joke go? An expert X is how's that joke go? X is former, and a spurt is a little drip of water, something like that. I forget how it goes. There's some joke around that. I forget. That was probably a bad dad joke that just failed. But.
So I definitely have a ton of respect for actual expertise, for actual experience and know-how and the ability to apply things, and even more the ability to teach those things to other people, to share knowledge. What I have a hard time with is the way experts say is used so often. Probably a few dozen times a week, even if you just scroll the headlines, it's experts say. And that's really what I want to break down a little bit. Just getting into that. Should we pay any attention to that? Should we push back against that idea of, well, this is what the experts say, so do this? Does that make sense?
Well,
yeah.
You're starting right out with a logical fallacy, right? That's a defer to authority, logical
appeal to authority.
Yeah. It's like
we've heard
a question right off the
we've heard a lot of it in the last 2 years, of course, and here we are. We're going to get into COVID.
Bring out your dead!
Oh boy!
And but we've heard that for a lot of years. The CDC says, the WHO says, and that is what a lot of the governments based the restrictions, the lockdowns, all of that, the mask wearing, everything on. So this is something I think that is pretty applicable, to think about, especially since a lot of those things have somewhat been proven wrong. So I think that kind of highlights that just because you're in a position of authority doesn't necessarily make you an expert. You know, if you're head of the CDC, that doesn't necessarily mean you're an expert. I think we always need to look at where does the source of that expert's knowledge, quote unquote, expert's knowledge, originate from, or where does their authority on that subject originate from?
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I would even go so far as to state that anyone in a leading position, a figurehead of a large institution, especially a government institution, is perhaps less likely to be a true expert, a true master of their profession, simply due to the fact that what they've been doing for their career is clawing to get their way up to the top of the ladder.
That's right. Clawing up the bureaucratic ladder. Yeah.
So that means they're primarily a politician if they've won themselves that post. So immediately, I think I have some skepticism about their motives, about whether or not they're beholden to anyone. That doesn't mean I dismiss everything they say, but it means I'm going to definitely use discernment and critique what they're saying. And definitely, if there's obvious motivation to frame things a certain way or adopt a certain viewpoint, then I'm definitely going to point that out.
And even just looking at it and holding it up to the flame of what's actually going on, you know, it's just like we say with crypto, you know, do your own research. Like we've got such a wealth of information with the internet. Oftentimes it's just a few clicks and you can, well, with some discernment, like Dan said, you can find things to either confirm or deny. And then but then it becomes the filtering out process of the information that you're reading. Because I know when, 2 years ago, when everything started, everything that was generally thought to be and held up to, this standard, like this is where the information came from, right? And like now all of a sudden it's just, you're drinking from the fire hose of all this information that's like, everyone's saying one thing or the other and nothing is lining up. And then, some people are getting stripped of their roles. Like there was nowhere to really trust. Like the trust was absolutely gone. Like, well, I think the supposed experts.
Yes, that's right. Well, if we look back in history, because I'm a history buff, so I look at a lot of these things as they evolve over history. And there was a time in the past when the media, for example, was generally trustworthy. When Dan Rather got on the TV or on the radio and said, "This is what's going on, folks," you generally could trust those were the facts, and they were just the facts. There was no agenda there. I think we saw that a lot with, doctors and scientists and things like that. It was very much, well, this is the scientific method and I followed the scientific method and these are the conclusions I've come to. I think a lot of that has been lost because of money, because of currency, because of government. Like, once again, government's ruined stuff. Government has, started funding research and funding this or that. And what happens is now there's an other incentive to maybe not strictly follow the data, or maybe be selective about the data. Things like that, where maybe they're not outright saying, "Hey, this, we're just going to tell a lie." We're just going to fudge the numbers. We're just going to leave out some of this information. And who's going to know? Because we're the experts, and we have generations of people who CNN is the news. Just like the CDC is the science, right? And
capital T, capital S.
yeah, exactly. And I think that as those things have moved away from the scientific principle and actually just reporting facts, that is not does not have an agenda or a message, a subtle message. People haven't adapted with it because people grew up trusting, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. And we have the tool of the internet to be able to actually go and do our own research now. Not that everything on the internet is true, but it is probably one of the greatest inventions for doing your own research as we've ever had,
Yeah, the best, source of published information.
Yeah, exactly.
And, certainly a lot of garbage in there as well. So at some point, I'd love to touch on the responsibility side of this, whether or not people can be trusted with this. But you mentioned statistics, and the framing really is important. Even if you don't outright manipulate them, as Mark Twain said, there are 3 types of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. Anybody who's good at statistics can simply pull the numbers they want out of there. And
that's right.
Present the case they want to make. And I really think starting with a follow the money type of investigation can definitely lead to some insights, and looking for opposing sources, looking for the other experts, because things are never one-sided. If they are, it's a cult. It's not science. It's a cult. First sign.
Here
are
we
you
are,
drinking Kool-Aid?
all of us agreeing with each other.
It's only 3 of us, though. So, but I actually think we would probably take a few different sides on this. Like, I might be more skeptical of the history of media, whereas Owen felt more positive about it. But either way, as I mentioned, personal responsibility. I think that is a person's responsibility to have a basic understanding, and at least to sort out who's the more trustworthy source. And that doesn't mean you then believe everything they say. That is also faith. As I mentioned, the cult thing. It's a continued filtering, keeping a critical eye on what they're saying.
Yeah, so that was going to be my question, was like, when you're talking about like this constant filtering, what are the steps we should take, or the practical applications for when someone says the experts say, or said expert is actually presenting stats or whatever, the process we should go through of determining, like, whatever it is, motive and things like that. Like, what are the steps we should do to kind of filter that out and determine
to think critically, because ultimately what you're asking is, how do I think critically about the information that I receive from other sources? Like, I can think critically of what I observe around me. I go outside and I get wet, so therefore I can critically think and say it must be raining, and if someone says, no, it's not raining, but I'm wet, well, I can use critical thinking and say, I'm not going to trust you what you say because I am experiencing this. So that's one thing. It's another thing when it is information that you're receiving that you don't have necessarily a direct experience or direct experience with. It's not experiential in that way. So that's basically what you're asking, right?
Yeah.
So how do you go about
thinking critically when said expert is being relied on or speaking?
Yeah,
right.
I mean, we could definitely break it down into some steps, such as critiquing for logical fallacies, follow the money, examining opposing viewpoints, but I think it really does start with the mindset, keeping a clear mind. I think the biggest thing you can do for that is not getting emotionally invested in politics, because that's how you get suckered in to spin on a story that is not true.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy, the media says Trump is bad because XYZ. And sometimes it's easy to, maybe you like Trump and you say, well, Trump is good, and because I like Trump, therefore they're wrong, and whatever he was doing was okay. You see that dichotomy in politics all the time, where it's one side says A, therefore the other side says B, period. I think we see that so much in Canada, but it seems especially bad in the US, that dichotomy. So yeah, keeping a clear mind and not getting caught up in that it's your side or my side kind of debate or argument or mentality is important, so that you can actually examine the facts. Following the money, that's another good one. You always want to be you always want to be following the motive, because humans are very much driven by different motives. And you might say, well, the motive of a doctor is to help people, right? That's why they did that, because they wanted to help people. The motive of me as a plumber is I just love plunging toilets. So, that's, no, I don't know. But you know what I mean? Like, there's this idea that motive drives everybody. And so when a university comes out with a study that says, apples are bad for you, you want to look at that, not just the study, but the motive for that. So often these studies might have, maybe these people that do the studies have, financing from, the pear board. And so therefore they're coming out with apples are bad. I don't know. So definitely you have to, but that's hard. Like, that's not an easy thing to investigate. And I think that's why people fall back on the experts say, just because that is easy. It's easy to just say, I don't want to have to go do all that independent research. I don't want to have to go, look on the internet and study where these people get their funding from. And I just want to trust what the person says. And there's scenarios we can do that when someone has a proven track record. Then you can start to do that. I think one of the big problems is, I think in the past that a lot of these universities, doctors, scientists, media had some track record, and I think we're realizing they've lost that track record, and they're just relying on their coattails, so to speak. Laurels. Yeah, exactly. I got an idea. This is not an original idea. I stole this from someone else. Maybe you guys have heard it, actually. It's another podcaster. The concept of an expert being responsible for the information they put out and the positions and stances they take currently does not really have any consequences. The media can say apples are bad today, and next week can say apples are good and pears are bad, right? And the third week can say, oh, you shouldn't eat apples or pears, cherries are what's in this week, right? And so there's no consequences to that changing of the tune over time. What if you had to put up a stake as an expert? That if you felt you were an expert, you had to stake something, stake money, not just your reputation.
Are we monetizing truth?
We're monetizing truth.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like
Definitely,
if you
traditionally, it was your reputation. That was what you were
right,
putting on the line,
yes,
and now it doesn't seem to matter very much.
that's right.
And you see more of that appeal to authority as integrity is in question. Then
Hmm.
that appeal to authority just becomes pushed more and more, and it's like, no, we are the authority. We are the
That's right.
authority. No, you have to trust us.
Yeah,
And it's like, no,
exactly.
whether or not I trust you is my choice. Are
Hmm.
you acting in a trustworthy manner?
And I think a lot of people would be much more dedicated in their pursuit of the actual truth and taking a stand on those things if there was real consequences. So if you want to be known, and this person, their idea was, if you want to be an expert on this topic, you feel you are, you need to put up $10,000, and that's your stake. And as you are proven to be correct or incorrect, you either lose your stake or your stake is gained upon. And so it's this idea that by actually pushing the truth and being correct in your field of expertise, you actually can receive something from that. And this could all be done on a blockchain. Funny, we talked about that. You could track all this quite easily on a blockchain. But if you are proven to be wrong or having a bad motive and pushing things that simply aren't true with an agenda, you would lose your stake. And that would almost in some ways be a measurement of your validity as an expert.
Yeah, because reputation's almost completely discredited at this point. Like, it doesn't really matter with the.
No, that's right. And if you have reputation and you come out with something that's truth, you can be darn sure if it goes against the narrative, they're going to try to ruin your reputation.
Yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Elon Musk tried to buy Twitter or has bought Twitter.
Tried to. It's on ice right now.
Exactly. And in the name of freedom or free speech, right? That was sort of the way that it was being spun. And the leftists started freaking out a little bit and said, we're going to be shut down. There'll be no more free speech on Twitter because we should be able to ban the people we want to ban. Well, what was the story that came out about 2 or 3 weeks later? Elon Musk was getting charged or reportedly, allegedly being charged with inappropriate behavior to a former employee.
Yep.
Right? So we're going to go after, we can't actually stop Elon from buying Twitter. So let's go after his reputation. Right? And that was predicted. Like, I saw as that whole Twitter thing was going down, someone actually posted, I forget who it was now. And they said, if this goes through, you watch, there'll be a sexual harassment lawsuit against Elon within a month. And sure enough, that's what happened. You know, whether anybody takes that seriously, I don't know. I certainly don't. You know, okay, let me rephrase that. I take it as seriously as the news stories that push it. It may be true, maybe not be true. I don't know.
Yeah,
but it certainly was.
Certainly was dirt.
It's an allegation.
Seriously, it's like if there's something, then let it go to court.
That's right. But it certainly is one of those things where that would never have come out or have been talked about if the media hadn't made sure it hit the front page.
The motivation for that being splashed around is what you're referring to, not.
Yes.
Yeah. Whether or not
whether or not this is true.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I definitely think, I mean, we mentioned the internet being wealth of information, but it's also a psychological battlefield.
Yeah. Yeah, and it takes up so much mental energy just to filter. Like, I heard this one guy talk about like a 10-step process or 5-step process, basically, that kind of seeks to throttle back the fire hose of information that social media and the mainstream legacy news networks are just constantly pushing at you. And within the first 5 steps, if you're kind of looking at like emotionally detached, like we mentioned earlier, looking for logical fallacies, again, like we mentioned earlier, and then whether or not it pertains to your immediate circumstances in life. And like you can mentally run through, once you get used to the cycle and run through it, you can mentally do an evaluation on a topic or a situation in like 3 minutes, like 1 to 3 minutes, because it never used to be this way. There was never this absolute deluge of information and happenings in the world that made to feel like, oh my goodness, this affects me right now, like I'm in danger. Say there's a tsunami in over in Southeast Asia or something like that, and like now we hear about it, it's like, holy smokes, the oceans are rising, there's going to be a tsunami in the Bay of Fundy in the next 5 years. But in the past, like you wouldn't even know that tsunami happened unless a local newspaper had someone in the area, or you actually traveled to said area and then found out, like, holy smokes, man, you guys are rebuilding what happened. And then they tell you, but it didn't have any impact on, it didn't have any direct impact on your life. And a lot of the things that are happening now, regardless of whether it's what an expert is saying, or it's just someone spouting nonsense on social media, or it's, CNN or Fox or whoever, or CBC, just spewing more stuff. Like, oftentimes a lot of it doesn't impact us immediately or in our day-to-day life, which, thinking of in terms like of bandwidth or internet, like your brain can only handle so much. Like your brain can only handle your emotional state can only handle so much. So being able to filter that out, think critically about it, evaluate on whether or not it directly impacts you, like that can save your sanity. Just doing like a few steps to kind of filter through what's going on.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think it's something we're not used to, either having so many things that are actually not in our immediate, but they're eliciting that fear stress response. And definitely, I think it explains a lot of kind of the whole psychology of our cultures, and definitely some of the downward trends, things like increases in depression and poor mental health across the board, all these things.
All right. So any other thoughts on, I feel like this is a topic that we probably will revisit in the future, because I think there's a lot more that needs to be said or could be said on it. But do you have any sort of final
we didn't
summation?
Well, I was going to say, we didn't even touch on like Orwell's 1984 or propaganda or any of that stuff.
Oh, that would definitely be, that could be a long talk. The nature of propaganda. A few final thoughts. I would really like to see, Ben used the phrase earlier in the show, with great power comes great responsibility. I would like to see a higher standard for those in positions of power. I mean, you mentioned theoretically ways we could see more consequences, but I mean, we have an alleged justice system currently, for what it's worth. And I think if justice was being done, we would see people in positions of power being held to a higher standard. With power should come that responsibility. Instead, we see kind of people getting, free passes again and again.
Well, I think that has to do with the way that and I don't call it a justice system, I call it a legal system. The way the legal system is
more accurate way of putting it.
The legal system's designed because, it does in many ways tend to be top down, and so the only way that you can really affect people who are maybe, I don't want to say a higher social standing, but you know what I mean, people who have that protection from
tier.
Yeah, they have the protection of the government, and the average person doesn't necessarily have the ability to stand up or the finances to stand up against them. That's why I think something like a monetary sort of staking system would work for that, because I'm sure you could build this quite easily, and you wouldn't need it to have it mandated by government. But it would simply be a place where if you want to be an expert, you can go here and stake it. And that means something. And you will be held accountable. And you'll be held accountable in a way that actually financially hurts you. And it would be a way, because it would be on an open blockchain or ledger or something like that, people could go and view it. And it would be public in that way. So the accountability would be there to everybody, so that if the system was compromised, people could see that, in fact, it was compromised. We don't get to see that behind the closed doors of the legal system or the internal workings of government. So,
for me, it just kind of, I think of what one of my instructors in college used to say. He's like, how do you eat an elephant? And you eat it one bite at a time. And so I think it starts with individuals starting to take responsibility, holding themselves to that higher standard, and then impacting the people in their families, then their neighborhoods, then communities, and just kind of just building it out from the bottom up. That's my final thought.
All right.
Yep.
All right. So let's move on to some news stories. And I'm going to play a little audio I think is kind of appropriate for what we just talked about.
TN. Our job is to report the news, not fabricate it. That's the government's job.
I always like that one. So yeah, you win some, you lose some. Man, I think you put the wins and loses in this week in the show notes. So
good old crypto Twitter. It's just a blaze.
Yeah.
So I guess there's one loss that I didn't put in, but we spent a lot of time talking about the Terra Luna fiasco last week. Anyway, the guy who's kind of behind it all, Do Kwon, I think is his name. He's fighting really hard to bring back Terra 2.0 and Luna 2.0. I'm just thinking, oh man, not another. Like, no, no. Just a big no.
Yep, there's going to be real world consequences to reputation there.
It's fun.
There's no shield to hide behind.
Yeah, it's funny. I heard some kind of speculation that was a government takedown.
Oh, really?
It was definitely a very well-funded operation.
Well, that's kind of what this person said.
That said it would have taken a decent bit over 100 million of capital to get off the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But of course, the speculation on that part is speculation, and with the idea that it would basically give an excuse for government to bring in regulation of stablecoin.
Yeah,
which we know they already want to do, but like so many of these things, government needs an excuse. They need people to lose something so that they can say, "We're here to save the day with our laws and regulations." And so that was the speculation. But
to tie it into what we talked about just previously, like there seems to be no consequences. Like there seems to be no consequences for this I mean, can we call it a massive failure? Like,
Sure.
really, a stable coin should remain stable, and there should be parameters and guidelines set in place for it to remain so.
Well, the consequence
But-
is the downfall of a business.
That is true, but
No.
like, I don't know, should anyone really trust to put money into Luna 2.0? I mean, that's just kind of what my thought is, just kind of thinking about what we've previously talked about tonight. But
I think that's up to the individual to decide.
fair enough. Take some responsibility.
We don't need the whole no investing if you're not accredited. It's like anyway.
The other loss was for the first time in Bitcoin's history, we have 8 straight weeks of a loss. So just like a red candle if you're looking at the chart.
Right.
There's it's the doom. This is the death cycle. Here we go. Gonna prove all these Bitcoin people wrong. It's gonna die.
Yeah, that's the whole sky is falling you get as soon as it's a bit of a bear market. All of a sudden, all the gold bugs and conventional market people come out of the woodwork and predict Bitcoin's death again.
Just add it to the Bitcoin obituaries.
So are you basically telling me that Bitcoin is on a better and better sale price for the last 8 weeks?
That is exactly what my brain has been telling me.
Yeah. So is there an upside to this?
To the dip in the market?
Yeah, like is there an upside beyond just a buying opportunity? Or like,
well, I mean, it's testing the floor of the prices. I mean, so I don't know. That's difficult to say, like how this affects the market long term. Ideally, I'd prefer to see Bitcoin like maintain a more even upward trajectory. The bouncing up and down is definitely wild, but I think that's just part of dealing with a new technology, a new marketplace.
I think it allows for the people with solid hands to get into it. I think it allows for the shaking out of the separation of the wheat from the chaff. I think that's probably more of the upside for me. It sounds kind of harsh, but sorry, not sorry. That's the way I see it.
So you're saying it's getting rid of the people who were just on the bandwagon to make a quick buck.
Yeah, because that's
and the people.
If that was possible, I would see that as an upside. Yeah, shake out some of the leveraged traders. I would be fine with them losing out on their Bitcoin at a loss.
But we've got in the win column, we've got Portugal absolutely rejected the crypto tax. There were 2 of them. The government proposed two new crypto tax bills. Portugal's been a crypto tax haven. There's been no capital gains or loss taxes
interesting
applied there for at least since 2018 is what the article I read on it said. And they so they unanimously rejected both of the bills in regards to taxing cryptocurrencies.
Wow, that's a very progressive mindset. Super interesting to see.
All right.
Definitely, I think it's worth noting that there's a saying, money goes where it's treated best. This may apply to countries that look to the future and encourage crypto instead of heavily taxing it.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think we're going to see North America United States especially being one of the last places that Bitcoin is fully accepted. I know we're going to see a lot of adoption here, but I think all the other countries around the world see the writing on the wall when it comes to the US dollar, and you're going to see way more of this type of news in other places before you see it here in North America. Again, because there's not a need. There's other countries saying we want to get out from under the US dollar, and the US, of course, doesn't want that. They're going to, it's their dollar that gives them the control. They're going to hang on to it as long as possible.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
but yeah, that's what I got for you this week.
Cool. Well, we don't have any listener feedback this week, so I guess it would be kind of pointless to spend more than even as long as I spent on it already. Talking
I would love
about
to see
that.
some feedback on this week's episode, especially though. It's like, what are the listeners' thoughts on experts, and how's that affecting culture? How is it affecting their own lives?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe even some stories about times that you trusted an expert and then discovered later that they weren't as good as they thought, or you thought at first, or maybe, what the steps you went through to discover that they weren't as much of an expert as they were purported to be.
Yeah, if you've been pressured to blindly trust an authority too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let us know.
Yeah, it's changingnormal at protonmail.com. You can check out our landing page, which will forward you to our WordPress site and links to all the different shows. Listen there. You can find them all at blueberry.com/changingnormal. And that's blueberry spelt BLUBRRY. If you like the show, please check us out on all our different platforms. We're on YouTube and Odysee, Twitter, and Twitter at changing_normal. And leave us likes and subscribes and reviews or questions. You can post there and we'll interact with you. Wherever you listen to our podcast, if there is a place that you would like to see our podcast, but it is not there currently, reach out to us and we will see what we can do to get it there. There's so many different platforms, it's hard to keep track of them all. And if you would like to donate to keep the lights on here at the Changing Normal podcast, you can send donations via a lightning address to endemicfeeling52 at walletofsatoshi.com. Or you can reach out to us and we'll figure out another method for making that happen. We'd like to thank some of our extensive staff this week. Our breathalyzer administrator is Eureka Garlic. Our ice rink manager is Sam Boney. Our credit counselor is Max Stout. Our emissions tester is Justin Hale. Our fact checker is Ella Fino. And our IQ evaluator is Lois Tescore. Our pedestrian advocate is Jay Walker. And with that, thanks for listening. And remember, create your own new normal every day.